that's the issue for persons of all ages. But it's a particular focus of the Older Adult Commission of Austin Metropolitan Ministries. To learn more, stay with us.
This is Austin Faith Dialogue, a public affairs program discussing the important crossroad of religion in life, produced by Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTVC TV. Austin Faith Dialogue highlights the interaction of the religious community with the social and cultural issues throughout our area. Now, today's edition of Austin Faith Dialogue.
Hello, I'm Richard Thompson of Austin Metropolitan Ministries, welcoming you to this edition of today's show. We are focusing today upon the Older Adult Commission, a particular work of the AMM that reaches out into the community in some new ways. And to help us to understand and appreciate that, we have with us Jane, as in Count Basie, Jane Basie, and we have Dr. John McNeil, who's the chair of that commission. And we're glad to have both of you here today.
Happy to be here.
And would like to have you tell us, first of all, I think, Dr. Basie, you're also the director of gerontology for the University of Texas School of Social Work?
Yes.
And I think that as chair of this, give us just a little bit of a sense of why it is that there is an Older Adult Commission in view of the aging process in our society today.
There's a real need to know more about older people because of just by sheer numbers, if no other reason. Now people 65 and older represent about 12% of the population. And if you divide that into 260 million people, just in this country, it gives you some idea of numbers. And in the next 25 years, people 65 and older will account for somewhere in the vicinity of 20% of the population. So huge numbers. And then you need to look at that in the context that people are living longer. For example, there are over 100,000 centenarians now. So we have individuals who are kind of in between the adult, younger, and middle-aged adult. So the adult person could literally have a parent they are concerned about who's 65 and older, or they could have grandparents, and they can have children and grandchildren. So we have a segment of the population that would have concerns about a wide spectrum in terms of ages. So we really need to be prepared for that.
Well, I think that one of the things the impression I get from what you're saying is that there's a burgeoning population of older adults nationally, and what about
internationally?
Internationally as well.
Yeah,
Okay, what about locally as far as how you have Older Adult Commission in Austin, Texas, what the need is there?
Great need. I believe the figures, if Jane may recall, what about 50,000 people in Austin alone over the age of 65. So there's a real pressing need, and that's increasing. This is one of the sun states, and with Del Webb coming in, with some of the industries coming in, and a number of the people are bringing their elderly parents with them. So the need is great now and will continue to increase over the next several decades.
I've thought that it's ironical that Austin should be the place where you've got Del Webb representing the older adult population, and Dell Computers that represents the other end of the adult spectrum in terms of the mix of younger folks and older folks in our town, and I think it makes it a unique place in that regard. But to just focus for a moment on this Older Adult Commission, and also, Jane, I understand you're part of the Austin Groups for the Elderly Age?
Yes, John and I are both on the board of Austin Groups for the Elderly, which is really a unique alliance of nonprofits that serve the needs of the elderly and their families here in Austin, including Hospice Austin, Gray Panthers, there's an adult day center, and so on. But we're particularly interested in the Older Adult Commission on awakening the religious community to some of the opportunities for older people. The idea of growing old, growing. You know, I think there's a lot to be done in the way of educating. I think sometimes people think of older people as maybe a burden rather than as a resource. And of course, in many of the congregations, the older population is becoming the majority. And rather than there just being a kind of a passive group, there's much that can be done as far as assuming a role of elderhood. As Maggie Kuhn once said, you know, I dare to speak the truth as often as I can, and I dare more often as I grow old. And I think some of us have found it liberating to look on older times as a liberating time and a time to really have some kind of an effect and also to grow.
Yes, there's never an end to the opportunity to be growing older gracefully. I'd like to have you tell us about some of the ways that you do that through the Older Adult Commission.
You want to mention the conference first?
Yes, well, we have had 3 conferences over the past 3 years where we have attempted to bring in people interested in older adult issues, and primarily from different congregations and interfaith congregation. And we think it has been rather successful. This past one, just a week ago, last Thursday, we had a one-day workshop, and I think the title of it gives some idea about the way we perceive older adults.
Okay, the title
was Leap into Action. And just the use of the term leap suggests that we see individuals over the age of 65 as not being put out to pasture. You know, that age 65 came around rather arbitrarily anyway.
How did that, wasn't the origin of that in Germany? And
it was in Germany with the idea that at 65, that was the acceptable retirement age. But we are talking about...
Didn't it have something to do with, like, Bismarck was retiring his military soldiers at 65, and we adopted that in this country in some way?
We just took it over automatically, and that was fed into the Social Security law in 1935. But if we look back, even in this country, in 1900, the average life expectancy was less than 50 years of age. It was 49 in 1900. So then the age of 65 would certainly suggest that you are past your prime. But now when we say leap into action, well, older people literally can leap into action. That's just the beginning of another life and another way of looking at life and a quality of life.
Would you like to leap into the discussion at this point, Jane?
Yes, I would be happy to.
Tell us what LEAP means.
Well, LEAP we use as an acronym for leadership, education, advocacy, and participation, with the idea that these are all fields for older people. And one of the things I want to mention, he was talking about another age in life. There's the term the third age, which the French people first used, and which is now being used. Well, for example, there's a third age program in the Catholic diocese. And the idea is that your first age of life is when you're learning, and your second age is when you're earning, and your third age is when you're returning. You're returning something
my word,
to society.
isn't that great?
Isn't that a good way to look at it? Though, of course, I think actually learning goes on all the time if you're really alive.
And you might do a little learning later on, too.
Absolutely, I hope so, yeah.
And returning along the way, but it's a nice way of seeing the lifespan as ongoing process. Well, let's take your learning, your education, your advocacy, and your participation.
Leadership was the first workshop that we had, and a wonderful young woman talked about to lead is to serve. And the idea, a lot of older people perhaps might think, well, it's my time to sit back now. But really, you can serve, whether it be your family or your community or your congregation, by leading and serving, thinking, well, what can I do for these people? And it opens up all kinds of activities. Education, we had in this particular one a workshop on emotional literacy, which is a new recognition that we aren't just bodies of flesh, you know, but that our emotions have a lot to do with our life, and we need to be more aware of how we can work on the health of that. And of course,
emotional literacy, did you say? Just being aware of that aspect of your being.
Yes,
Okay.
and recognizing it and nurturing it.
Okay.
And then advocacy, of course, we have in this town lots of opportunities for speaking up for the rights of the elderly people, as well as for the other, perhaps, people that can't speak for themselves, the children. Gray Panthers or AARP. We had a person from AARP speaking there to us. And then participation, well, that was a whole big topic that we had.
And what does that refer to more specifically?
Well, we had a couple of people from St. Matthew's Senior Activity Center who shared with us what it has meant to them to participate in a group that meets regularly. Since they found that the area around St. Matthew's had like 45% of the population was 65 and older, and so they decided to develop a program getting some of the older people to come up with ideas of what they'd like to have, whether it be classes in Tai Chi. And we did have one of the seniors show us some of the Tai Chi movements. John pointed out something about Tai Chi to me.
Yes, well, Tai Chi is a slow movement exercise regime and sort of teaches centrality. But the Chinese people have been doing this for over 2,000 years. And we are Johnny-come-latelys in this country.
I see.
And it has just become popular, this sort of exercise or activity for older people.
Well, I know that Jane has been known to lead in some exercises like that, and after we come back from the break, I'd like for you to help us to demonstrate that with us.
Okay.
But let's just, for now, make sure that we're clear about that Austin Metropolitan Ministries, with its Older Adult Commission, is reaching out to congregations.
Yes.
Consciousness raising, stimulating them, nurturing them to be involved in these various aspects of leadership, education, advocacy, and participation. Okay, I'm trying to summarize in a sense what we've been saying here. And you were mentioning St. Matthew's. There was an article in, this is the Episcopal Church out in Northwest Hills, an article in the paper about one example of how that was a community for someone who felt isolated. Did you see that, and could you review that with us?
Well, actually, one of the participants out there was a 91-year-old woman who told about how she became involved, that she was on the steering committee, and she found that it was broadening her horizons at 91 years of age. She's still having her horizons broadened, and she was moved to participate in the exercises 4 times a week. She is no longer giving rides as a part of the caregiver group out there because of her age, but she's still very much alive, and many of the people said that it changed their life around because they were part of a group and were no longer isolated.
Yeah, I think, to me, that was the impression that I got, is that if nothing else, congregations that provide opportunities for older adults to interact and not just to pass the time, but to do so creatively, where they're in a growing mode, can just open up energies and vistas that would never be possible otherwise. And I think that in the minute we have before the break, Dr. McNeil, could you give us just one sense of why you got into this work with AMM, with the Older Adult Commission?
Well, for years I've had an interest in aging, academically more so. But as I started reaching that age, I had a private, very personal, individual interest.
Right.
So when the opportunity came up to be a part of this, it just fit many of my needs and the things that I had been studying for over the years.
Okay.
And I have some rather strong religious convictions also. So the meshing then of my religious needs and personal interest and academic knowledge about aging.
All came together.
Yes.
Well, we're going to come back together here again in just a few moments, but we're going to take a break first. Be happy to have you folks stay with us on this edition of Austin Faith Dialogue.
Serving Austin means serving you. That has always been the primary goal of Austin Metropolitan Ministries. We are religion in action through the work of these organizations. Each plays a key role in making the capital city a better place to live, but we can't do it alone. Do you have some spare time, talents, or any resources that you can share? If you do, please call AMM at 472-7627, because serving Austin means serving you.
Welcome back to Austin Faith Dialogue, where today we are focusing upon the Older Adult Commission of Austin Metropolitan Ministries. And delighted to have with us Jane Basie, who is a member of the board for the commission, and the chair of that commission, Dr. John McNeil. And I was opening the show with the phrase growing older gracefully, which I perceive, Jane, has to do with not only the chronological just passing of years, but continuing to be active physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And I've had occasion to see you help on the physical side of things with some very simple kinds of exercises that I think would be of use to persons of any age, but seem to be particularly adapted to older folks. Could you help us go through that exercise?
Why not? There are several churches who do have exercise programs for older adults. And of course, the first good exercise is to sit up properly. If you have good posture where you're sitting up and your shoulders are down and you're just holding your body up against gravity, that's work and that's exercise. And another thing is to get the miracle juice flowing in our body, the blood. And so if you open and shut your hands with real vigor and intent as you raise your arms up, you're getting that going up, and then you're stretching your rib cage as you reach up and then back down to your knees, and then lift one shoulder up and roll it around. We tend to get kind of set in our ways, and you do a little flexibility and then reverse them and go the other way. And while the other shoulder's not working, you see, do it now. It's work because it's resisting movement. Okay, very good. Now let's do both of them. Really go around and then back the other way. And then stretching out over your knees. Get that spine flexible. And then roll back up. Keep your head down. And you're rolling up a vertebrae at a time, and your head comes up last. Do that one more time. Stretch down, way down, and hang your head low. And then roll back up, and then let's take a deep breath. Let's raise our arms and breathe in deep, 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 deep. Breathe in and then blow it out slowly. Get rid of all that impurity. Our bodies were meant to move, see, and a lot of older people think that just because they're getting old, they shouldn't. And actually, they're much less likely to fall if they keep working their bodies and keep it fit.
I was just with some friends who had an infant in their house. Actually, the child's, I guess, more like 2.5, and constant motion. I mean, you could spend a whole day just watching this kid do things.
Or get tired watching them do
That's right, wears you out just to watch them. And the fact that, you know, organisms come into the world needing to move and to be growing in that way, so it never ends if we're conscious of it, I guess.
You know, in addition to the physical, though, I think one component maybe we should just mention, because it frightens a number of people as they get older. They, if they can't remember what they want to remember when they want to remember it, they get very fearful because of the dreaded word Alzheimer's. And they say that if I can't remember, there's something wrong. But young people forget things too. But they don't worry about it. They just go on to something else. But as you get older, it's a very frightening experience. But there's nothing to suggest that older people have significantly greater memory problems than younger people. It may take them a little longer to pull it out of the storage bin, but there's no need for alarm.
And of course, one way to keep that from becoming a problem is to keep mentally fit. And so by participating in scripture studies or in doing some kind of activities with younger people, and many of the churches have intergenerational programs, and we like to be kind of a catalyst in the Older Adults Commission and share ideas that people have in their churches or congregations for doing things. And one way we do that is with a newsletter. For Older Adult Commission OAC, we call it the Oak Leaves. And so in it, we're able to give people some ideas of what some groups have found to be successful programs for intergenerational and for keeping your mind. And then also for your spirit, to develop your spirit, because that's definitely a component of growing older that everyone is aware of.
And I want to focus on that just for a moment, but first of all, oak leaves. If persons want to know how to connect with that, they can call the Austin Metropolitan Ministries number, the one that we show at the middle and at the end of the show, but let's show it right now just to make sure that it's fresh, the 472-7627 way of getting hold of information and can get on that newsletter list.
Right.
In which you give ideas, various suggestions in terms of what other congregations are doing.
And for example, this last issue the theme was the caregiving part of growing older, and it told about the different caregiver groups around our town, which indeed were started by what was the kind of the precursor of the Older Adults Commission, the Older Persons Task Force. There was a volunteer person, Mr. Wright, Frank Wright, who was very active in going around to churches, and they would join together several churches in a geographical area and maybe a neighborhood association, and they would pool their resources, and in one church there would be an office where they could get names of volunteers who would be willing to drive people who were homebound or perhaps go on errands for them. And this caregiving group situation has really spread over our whole city. I think we're #1 in the nation as far as and this started from actually the AMM's Older Person Task Force, which has now evolved into the Older Adults Commission.
Richard, how many of the caregiver group are there in this?
I believe there's 7 on all different geographical areas.
Okay, and so this is a more practical kind of thing, hands-on ministry with folks who are needing rides or some assistance in that way.
To help them stay home, remain independent at home.
Okay, that's the overall objective of it then. Okay, well, I think that, again, people can get a hold of AMM still for that. The ministry that continues, although it's spun off and has a life of its own right now. Meanwhile, back at the Older Adult Commission, we were talking about the physical, the mental, and now approaching what would be, I think, the most distinctive aspect of what you do is the spiritual. I mean, Austin Groups for the Elderly, the age organization, that umbrella group, has a variety of programs and emphasis, but it seems to me what makes what you all are doing particularly significant is it connects to the churches and into the life of the Spirit in that way. Would that be a fair summary of that? And Dr. McNeil, you were saying something about how your religious convictions have led you to participate. Can you share a little bit of that?
Well, throughout my life, I and my siblings were taught that religion is a vital component of everyone's life. And you need to live by the golden rule of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I think that's very critical in terms of older people now, because we tend to stigmatize them, look at them in a somewhat negative fashion. So with a religious commitment to want everyone to be treated with some level of equality, then the spirituality component of that plays out in terms of relationships with older people and teaching others some way of looking at older individuals in the community. So over the years then, this feeling that there's something above and beyond us as individuals, and whether we say that we are agnostic, atheistic, or believe in some other type of religion, that there is a belief in the sanctity of people and their worth as individuals.
You know, I think that the image of God comes to mind as you talk about that.
Yes.
Everyone made in the image of God. And I also think of Gail Sheehy's book, New Passages. In her original book, Passages, she stopped in the 50s, and for some reason, and then perhaps discovered just how many folks are in the older years beyond that, and so she's carried it forward. And I was interested how she says there are various stages of the older adult years. You've got the younger older adults, and those who are more in the middle, and those who are really older in terms of years. But the idea is that no matter how old, there is always that potential for growth. And I heard once about Senator Thomas Benton of
Missouri.
who was, I think, died in his 90s, but always a very vigorous and growing person. And on his epitaph was, "When last seen, Senator Benton was still rising." And I think that could be another form of saying we're hoping to grow older gracefully throughout the whole of our lifespan. I wanted to have you give your spiritual point of view on what all of this work means and what it can be for our viewers.
Well, I first would like to quote something that Sister Mary Rose said at our last Leap into Action conference in a spiritual reflection. She quoted someone that has meant a lot to me. It says, "Life is a mystery to be lived, not a problem to be solved." And she went on to mention that all the scientific knowledge that we have developed is just a candle in the universe, and there's so much more that we don't know about. And there's so much to be explored. And to me, this is what growing old gracefully, we have this opportunity to grow in our relationship with God, with the universe, with our fellow journeyers on this pilgrimage.
Okay, so that was one particular note that was sounded at this LEAP conference. But what, in terms of your own experience, your own faith
Well,
background?
the last part was mine. That first quote was from the conference, but the last part about, I think we're on a journey, and to me, to be still seeking, still striving, is what it's all about. To learn is to live, and I think to learn about our relationship with God and our fellow human beings is what it's about.
And you said something too, Dr. McNeil, that made me think about the younger folks needing the older folks in our society. I mean, the interdependence of this intergenerational aspect of what you're doing. And so what we're hoping would happen today is as people look in, it's not just those over 65 that we're hoping to interest and involve, but persons who are younger than that to realize that we can benefit from one another in ways that you have benefited us as you have joined us today. Jane Basie and Dr. John McNeil, you have been gracious in our reflections upon growing older gracefully.
Enjoyed it.
Delighted to have had you here. Also delighted to have you folks with us today, and hope that you'll be with us next week on our next edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. I'm Richard Thompson, extending peace to you all, and good day.
For more information, call Austin Metropolitan Ministries.